All right, so let's get right into it, boys. 2 days ago, I met this beautiful blonde Finnish girl during the daytime, and I scheduled a date with her for that night, and eventually we went out for the date and she came back to mine by the end of the night, and we had a magical evening together right here in this apartment. So in this video, I'm going to break down the entire experience from the initial approach all the way up to the end of the night. So the initial approach. So I was outside in central Bangkok, this really big open air shopping area. And I decided to, go outside, film some footage, also go get some food. And I also wanted to do a proper session to try and get some dates lined up. And so by the end of my session, by the 15th approach, I saw this girl and I could see her from quite far, but I didn't get a close-up view on what she looked like, but I could tell that she was attractive. And then she got closer and I could see that she was wearing this cheetah print dress, which made her look amazing. And what's funny is that once I got a closer look at her, I could also see these other guys, a group of guys who were looking at her as well. And as she passed them, they all turned their heads around to check her out. So I did not waste any time. I got right in there, said, "Excuse me." It took a bit of time to, let's say, get her to stop and then be fully engaged with me. And then at that point, I gave her the compliment. And I remember saying, "You look very, very beautiful." And so I said that with composure, and it was very calm, and I said it very directly as well, just to hammer the point home, because she looked stunning. And then we had a conversation from that point. So the conversation. Now the conversation itself wasn't anything special. It was probably 5 minutes at most. And we just chatted about, her time in Bangkok, my experiences so far since we were both tourists. And she just gave me a bit more information about what she's been up to, who she's with, what she was doing in the square at that moment. And then I just essentially told her what I was up to. And yeah, we just had this nice back and forth. I'll say the first good sign during the conversation that she was interested in me was the fact that she was asking me questions very early on in the interaction. So that showed me that she was engaged and she wanted to know more about me, and she was interested in getting to know me. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked any questions and she would have just waited for me to finish, and then she would have excused herself. So that was the first good sign. I would also say that as soon as I gave her the compliment, the eye contact between us was very strong, and that remained the case throughout the conversation. In fact, I remember there were points where we were maintaining eye contact, but there was a pause where none of us said anything, and we just sort of stared at each other for maybe a few seconds, nothing too prolonged, but there was that tension. And then she would break the silence, giggle, and then ask me a question. And so I thought that was a really nice way to polarize the conversation, aside from just having this, let's say, generic talk about, our day, how our day's going, and what we've been up to in terms of our travels. And then at some point, I noticed that she had a broken phone screen. So I just teased her about it and told her, I don't trust girls who have broken phone screens, because clearly you don't have your priorities in the right order. So I just made a joke about that, pulled her arm a little bit, not physically, I mean metaphorically. So that was again another way for me to just be a bit playful, insert my playful character, which is something authentic to me. I like to, make fun of myself and also make fun of people, and just add a bit of banter to the conversation. So that was a nice way to slip that in. But of course, it all happened naturally, right? None of this was planned. None of this was any lines or routines. I mean, how could it have been? I didn't even know she was going to be there that day. So this was all just improvisation. And then we had the close, right? So now the conversation was playful. I could already tell that she was somewhat interested. So at this point, I just wanted to ask her about what her plans were for the remaining few days that she was in Bangkok for. So she told me that she was leaving Bangkok on Thursday, which was today as of filming, but this was happening on a Tuesday. So I knew that, okay, there were basically two options. I could either get her number and tell her, okay, let's try and schedule something for the day after, which would have been a Wednesday or yesterday. Or I could ask her what she's up to tonight, right? Because when I'd approached her, it was about 4 p.m. and I figured, well, she's here shopping, so maybe she doesn't have that much to do. And so I'm also free this evening. So why not try to get her out on a date tonight rather than waiting and trying to set something up for another day? So I told her flat out, I want to take you out tonight. I said it word for word, and I just let the silence sit. And I looked at her and she took a brief second, and then she said, okay, that sounds good. And then once we talked a bit more, she told me that she'll have to double check with her friend because they were both traveling together and they had some plans to get dinner together. So of course I wouldn't expect her to throw away those plans in order to see me. So she told me she just had to double check that her friend would be cool with her going out after the dinner, assuming that the timing would work out. So when she said that, a part of me thought, is this her way of slowly or subtly rejecting me or trying to essentially let me down easy rather than just say, okay, yeah, I can see you afterwards? But very quickly I realized, no, I don't think that's the case. Let me just remain optimistic and assume that she just needs to figure out what the plan is for the evening, and then we can go from there. So yeah, in response I said, that's totally cool, no rush. I'll just take your details down and then you can reach out to me once you've had your dinner, and then we can just sort out the logistics after that. And she said, cool. So I took her WhatsApp down. When I tried to get her WhatsApp QR code, it wasn't initially working, and I could see that it wasn't working and she could see that it wasn't working, like it wasn't actually scanning the code properly. And then eventually it did, but then the number seemed to be off. And so at some point she basically grabbed my phone and made sure that the message went through to her phone. So she was essentially double checking to see that it worked and that she got my message. So again, that was a good sign that she was interested in remaining in contact with me, because if she wasn't, she wouldn't have taken the extra effort to make sure that our details were sorted out properly. Now, in terms of the text thread, so I have it here on my phone and I'll put it up on the screen as well. So you can see that it was pretty simple. So you can see that we sent that initial message, the X, at 4:30. So that was literally right before we parted ways. That was just to double check that the message actually went through. And so about an hour later, I sent another message saying, hey, I didn't add anything else. I just wanted to see if she would respond. And then she said, hi. So she responded, although she responded about, let's say, just under 2 hours later. But that's expected because she was busy shopping, so I didn't expect her to respond immediately. And then I just added some callback humor just to get the conversation going back a little bit. So, you know, when we first met, she told me that she was out here to do some shopping, but we sort of joked about the fact that she'd already been out for maybe an hour and a half at that point and hadn't actually bought anything. And then she responded, and then I also teased her again about the phone screen because the phone screen was broken. And then at that point I was like, okay, she's responding, which is cool. So I then just went straight to setting up logistics. So I like the way I did this because you can see I said, so I found a bar we can go to tonight. So this is essentially me saying, I'm assuming that she's going to come out tonight, right? I'm not even asking her if her friend I'm not asking her, hey, did your friend say it's cool? Like, I'm not asking any of that. I'm just assuming that she's already decided that it's cool. So that's why I just said, hey, I found a bar that we can go to tonight. And then she responds and tells me that she just got to the restaurant with her friend and they ordered food. And so in about an hour's time, she'll be ready to come to me and see me. the way that I read that was, okay, she's down to come and she just needs to finish up with her friend. And so it might take an hour or maybe a little bit more, but essentially she is willing to come and see me. Now, I still didn't take that as 100% confirmation, because in that hour, anything could change, right? And then I told her, yeah, you let me know when you're done and then I'll send you the location, right? And then she responded to that a couple minutes later and said, I will. And then you can see that between when she said, I will, and then her next message was about an hour. And I didn't I didn't text her as she was eating dinner, trying to maintain conversation. I just let her have her dinner. I went about my business and I waited for her to tell me that when she's done, right? And then she did. And so I think at that point, that's when I knew, okay, she's definitely coming. So of course she responded, said, okay, we're done now. That was an hour later. And then I said, cool. And then I sent her the address for where I wanted her to meet me. And then I told her, look, you can meet me here. Then we'll walk over to the bar. And I told her to take a motorcycle because that's the quickest way here in Bangkok, since there's so much bloody traffic with the cars. And then she said, okay, I'll be there in about half an hour. And then I told her to shoot me a text when she arrives. And so that was the last message. That was the last message before she eventually arrived. And then you can see, obviously at the end here, the next message is at 3 a.m. because I got her an Uber to get back to her hotel. And she told me that she'd got back in time, or got back safe and sound. And then I told her good night. And then the rest of the texts are just me texting her the morning after. I try to keep the text messaging brief and only use it to set up logistics, because anything else other than that is too much or too extra, especially now that we've already planned the date. To me, there's no point in trying to add extra fun or, try and, let's say, carry on the conversation on text, because we're going to do that on the date. Now, when it came to picking the venue, I wasn't sure if I should pick a venue that was closer to my place or closer to her place. Now, obviously, she was in a hotel, but she was in a hotel with her friend. So I very quickly realized it wouldn't make sense for me to try to go to a bar closer to her place when her friend is in her hotel room, right? That wouldn't have worked out. So I decided to obviously invite her to my side of town, even though it was a little bit further. And so again, a part of me thought, she'll have to make a 30-minute bike trip to my side of town, which to me isn't that long, but to her it might be long, right? And the cynic in me, the doubter in me thought, she might not be willing to trek that far. Is she into me enough to make that sort of journey, especially this late in the evening? But after a second of thinking about it, I thought, come on, Ian, like if she's into you, then she'll make the effort. And it's that simple. So I told her, yep, this is the location, come through, take a motorcycle like I showed in the text, and she came through. So she arrived, I saw her on the motorcycle, she stepped off it, and it was funny because she was wearing this absolutely gorgeous dress. So like I said, she went to a restaurant with her friend, and clearly this was a fancy restaurant. So she was all done up, looked incredible in this dress. And I was still in the clothes that I was wearing when I met her, which was my white New Balance top, as well as my shorts and my sneakers. Again, a part of me thought, oh no, this isn't a good look. She's looking stunning, whereas I'm clearly underdressed for this date. But then I quickly realized, who cares? She likes me, she's here, let's just have fun. Now, in terms of the actual bar that I selected, it was the bar that I've been going to since I arrived in Bangkok. It's a very small, cool, chic bar, fairly quiet. They play music. Sometimes they have live musicians to perform, but it's a very relaxed vibe, but it's not too loud. So you can have conversations with your date or with your friends or whoever's there. So that's why I like it. And I'm familiar with it. And it's also very close to my Airbnb. So it was a perfect spot for us to go to. So we arrived at the venue, and then as soon as we entered, I asked the bartender to sit us at the couch area, just so that it could be more cozy and we could sit next to each other. Now, when we actually got to the couch is sort of designed like this. So it's a very small couch. And so she was sat here and I was sat there. Initially, when we sat down, we weren't actually right next to each other. We weren't facing head on, which I don't like to do because that feels like an interview rather than a date. But we were essentially adjacent to each other, which wasn't an issue. Again, no need to overthink it. But of course, in my head, I thought, well, I actually want to sit way closer to her. But in that moment, I didn't want to push it too much. And I thought, no, this is cool. Let's just sit where we're sat right now. There's no need for me to immediately shift over to her side. Let me just let it happen naturally. And so that's exactly what I did. So we ordered our drinks, we had a bit of conversation. And so eventually we were talking about music festivals and she mentioned one that she'd been to. So I asked her to show me the pictures and the videos on her phone. And so I took that as an opportunity to now shift her a little bit down her couch. And then I essentially moved myself and sat right next to her. And so that was very natural. I just wanted to get closer to her so that I could actually see what she was talking about. And so at this point now we're sat side by side, you know, right next to each other, and we're literally like right here. She's right here next to me. Yeah, so at that point we kept on talking. We were really vibing, cracking jokes, teasing each other, and it got a lot more physical. So now I'm just like, you know, really, you know, touching her everywhere, like her shoulder, her legs, you know, the usual stuff that you would do on a date with somebody that you're clearly feeling a vibe with. So yeah, that was happening back and forth, and she was touching me as well. And, you know, it was very natural and very, let's say not intense. It wasn't intense, but it was very playful. And that just kept going on. And then eventually, you know, I wanted to buy a second round of drinks. So I got up, went to the bar, ordered the second round, and then came back to sit with her. And when I came back, I didn't ask her any questions. I just sat down. I looked around the bar, just wanted to look at the decor and the different artwork and the books that were lying around. And then at some point, I just looked at her, and then she looked at me, and then we stared at each other for a few seconds, similar to what happened when I first approached her. And then I essentially just put my finger on her chin. I subtly drew her closer to me, and then we made out. So of course, at that point, after making out, the next logical step was like, okay, we're really feeling each other at this point. You know, we kept on talking for maybe another 20 minutes. And then eventually I said, all right, look, let's just finish these drinks and then let's go back to mine. And I just said it like that. I didn't say, oh, let's go back to mine and watch some Netflix, or let's go back to mine and maybe, you know, play a card game. I didn't do any of that. I just said it direct, and I said, look, let's go back to mine. And she said, yeah, cool. And so we got up and she went to the bathroom. And then as she was in the bathroom, I met this group of Thai lads, and they were talking amongst themselves. And then eventually I asked them a few questions. We had a back and forth. We were joking around football. And when she came back, she could see that I was just talking to these guys, making up conversation. And again, even though I wouldn't say that's a big deal, I think it just goes to show that, you know, I think girls like it when they see that their date can be social, right? Because I already told her I was an introverted guy, but it doesn't mean that I'm afraid to make up conversation with people that I genuinely, you know, find interesting, or people that, you know, make an effort to talk to me. So yeah, that was cool. You know, by the time she came back, I was just having this really fun convo with these Thai guys. So yeah, I wrapped that up. I told them it was very nice to meet them. And then I said goodbye to the bartender because I kind of know him now since I've been to that venue a few times. And then, yeah, I just held her hand. We left the venue, and then we walked back home to my place. And yeah, of course, on the way there, things got a bit steamier, especially in the elevator to my apartment. But yeah, we got to my floor, got to the apartment, and then the rest is history. Now, in terms of my general thoughts on the entire experience, even today, as I'm filming this breakdown, I'm still kind of pinching myself at how this entire experience played out. Because you have to remember that I was in a completely different place a year ago before I started Cold Approach. even 6 months ago, before I'd been coached by Ephraim, but I'd done a decent number of approaches by myself, I still wasn't able to go the full distance with my dates. And at that time when I had those dates, but they weren't going anywhere, I couldn't have ever imagined that I would be on a date with an absolute bombshell, blonde Finnish girl, and be able to meet her that day, take her out that night, and then bring her back to my apartment on the same night. And then at another level is the fact that it was actually way easier than I could have ever predicted, because at a subconscious level, I've always thought that if I wanted to get laid by, let's say, a top tier girl, I would have to try extra hard. I would have to be this performing monkey who could make her laugh all the time, who could, show how interesting I am, and just be this rock star guy from top to bottom and just be incredible in every imaginable way. But after this experience, I realized that that couldn't be further from the truth. And it's also important to note that earlier that day, in the morning, I'd received a voice note from the half German, half Nigerian girl who told me that she wasn't interested in me anymore. She wasn't attracted to me in the way that I thought she was. And so even though I'd made out with that girl and we'd been on 2 dates, it turns out that she wasn't really feeling me like that. And of course, that was a gut punch, right? So you can imagine I woke up that morning somewhat disappointed, and you can see it in my vlog, right? I filmed a video that morning saying, I'm disappointed, it's not the best situation. Clearly, I misread the whole vibe going on between us. Maybe not the whole vibe, but clearly she wasn't as into me as I was into her. And so the fact that I was able to pick myself back up and just go back outside, put in more reps, and then this is what ended up happening on the same day is absolutely insane. I could have sulked about the fact that the hot German Nigerian girl wasn't into me. I could have waited a few days to recover from that and then got back out into the streets eventually. But that morning I woke up and I said, screw that. I'm going to put in more reps. I'm going to give myself another chance. So for the day to play out that way was perfect. Again, there were more self-limiting beliefs and assumptions about these kind of dates that I also destroyed. So one of them is the fact that if I look back at the entire date and I look back at how I was behaving versus how she was behaving, I could tell that she was actually probably nervous, right? She was way more nervous than I was. I could tell that she was, she was fiddling with her hair. She was making sure that she looked good. There were times when I was asking her questions and she couldn't really answer them. I could just tell that she was also trying to impress me, right? She was trying to impress me. And that was really interesting because I always thought it had to be the other way around. But it turns out that she actually really liked me. She liked what she saw and what she heard when we first spoke. And throughout the date, she probably grew to like me even more. And so that really hammered home the idea that I'm actually enough as I am. I don't have to perform. I don't have to put on a mask, put on a facade. I can just be myself. And it's funny because a few days ago, somebody left a comment on one of my videos and said, you need to go to the gym, bro. Now, in the past, that kind of comment would have kind of gotten to me and I might have internalized it or wondered if he was right. Maybe he's right. Maybe I need to gain 10 pounds of muscle before I can approach this blonde Finnish girl. But of course, after an experience like last night, and of course the other experiences that I've had through Code Approach, now stacking on top of each other, I realized those kind of comments can go in one ear, go out the other ear. I don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore because I have hard proof that I can attract the kind of girls that I want to attract without having to gain the muscle, make the money, have this actor level charisma, or be this extrovert that I'm not really used to being. And so now that I don't really put too much weight on the whole red pill ideology, I've essentially now shifted my perspective and my assumptions on what's actually real in the world and what's actually possible for someone like me. And so lastly, I'll end with this. This experience has been the culmination of me destroying multiple self-limiting beliefs time and time again, from the complete beginning when I started cold approach a year ago, all the way up to 2 days ago. The first self-limiting belief that I had to overcome was the idea that I couldn't even do an approach, right? And that if I did an approach, then the girl would be immediately turned off by me. And then I did my first approach 1 year ago in London at Covent Garden. And what do you know? It actually went fairly well. So that self-limiting belief was destroyed. But then I came across another obstacle. I realized that the girls were flaking my messages. And so at that point, I had another self-limiting belief, and I thought, oh, well, these girls are never going to respond to my messages because of the way I look or because I'm not cool enough. And then eventually that belief was shattered, and they responded to my messages after putting in more reps. But then even though they responded to my messages, and then I struggled to get them on the dates. And so I had another self-limiting belief, and I thought, oh, they're not going to go on a date with me because they don't actually think I'm really that interesting. Maybe they've changed their mind because they have better options on Tinder or on Hinge. And then through more action, I eventually shattered that belief, and I managed to get my first date through cold approach. But then I ran into another issue. I couldn't escalate on the date. The dates were very platonic. And then I had another self-limiting belief, thinking, oh, these girls, yeah, sure, they're gonna go on a date with me, but they're always gonna see me as a friend. They're always gonna friend zone me. They're always gonna friend zone me because I'm not smooth enough. And then eventually, after more action, after more dates, I eventually broke through that self-limiting belief, and I made out with my date for the first time. And then of course, another self-limiting belief crops up as I've struggled to get the girls to come back to mine or to go back to theirs and to go the full distance. And so again, I thought to myself, oh, this is never gonna work because maybe I'm just not that guy. Maybe they just don't see me as that guy. Maybe I'm not masculine enough. Maybe I'm not bold enough to really go for it and to ask them to come back to mine. And even if I do, it's never going to happen because at the end of the day, I'm just a piece of shit and I'm never going to be worthy of these women. And then eventually I got through that self-limiting belief and I broke it, and I managed to bring a girl back to my place. And that happened about 7 months after I initially started cold approach. So again, taking action is what eventually got me the result I wanted. And then of course, the latest self-limiting belief was that sure, I could attract certain kinds of girls, but there's no way I'm going to be able to attract the top tier baddies and bombshells that most guys are really into, because clearly they are way out of my league. They only want to be with the athletes or the gym maxed bros or the rich guys or the guys who are really, really extroverted and charismatic. But finally, 2 nights ago, I broke that self-limiting belief, and I did it through action. And now I'm sat here recording this video, having gone through all those different hurdles, and as a result, I'm a completely different person with a new level of confidence that I can't even really describe. But if you'd met me 1.5 years ago, the way that I talked, the way that I walked, the way that I viewed myself, the way that I carried myself in general, the way I looked at myself in the mirror was completely different to how it is now. And so if that's where I'm at right now, then imagine what the future holds. And so hopefully that date story can serve as some inspiration to you guys to start your journey. You know, start your journey, try and do it solo. If you have the money and the resources, get somebody to coach you, get Ephraim to coach you. Ephraim coached me, and that was a massive, massive turning point in my journey, because I finally had somebody to hold me accountable, someone to support me, someone to identify flaws and sticking points that weren't easily recognizable beforehand, because I couldn't see my own issues when it came to owning the approach or being convicted or just being, having less shame around this whole cold approach activity. And so hopefully that gives you the inspiration to make a change. And I can't wait to talk about more experiences I have. Otherwise, I hope you found some value from that, and let's keep it pushing. Good luck.